Well, I'm Tom Biebighauser. I work as a wildlife biologist and wetland ecologist, and I started restoring vernal pools over 20 years ago. And I've been working to do this all across North America and around the world. And I'm just happy to talk to you folks about vernal pools tonight. Now, vernal pools are wetland areas that will dry up from time to time. They're really just big puddles. And this vernal pool you're looking at here will fill in spring. It will fill with the heavy rains and with snowmelt, and then it will dry this time of year in the fall. Now, vernal pools are also called vernal ponds. They're called ephemeral wetlands, and they're called seasonal wetlands. And these names all describe wetlands that contain water for part of the year. Again, they're big puddles. And the vernal ponds will normally fill with water in the spring, and come summer or fall, they will go dry. And the photo you're looking at here is a vernal pool that we restored on the Danube National Forest in Kentucky back in 2006. Now, vernal pools, they may be located in open areas that are sunlit locations, and they may be located in shaded areas. And this vernal pool you're looking at here, it contains quite a diversity of plants because it's in the sun. Just like you would never plant a garden in the shade, vernal pools, when they're in the sun, they get that light, and we get this great diversity of plants. Now, this vernal pool is not connected to groundwater. It has a base of compacted clay, and it holds water just like a cereal bowl, but in the fall, it will go dry. Now, vernal pools, they're really exciting places to visit. And when you go to a vernal pool, you can't help but smile and laugh because you're seeing wildlife. You're seeing wildlife species that you won't see anywhere else because of that shallow water and that sunlight. Now, vernal pools are fun places for children to explore, and also they're safe places for children to explore because of that shallow water, and they generally have a firm bottom where they're not going to get stuck in the mud. Now, when you visit a vernal pool, you may see wood ducks. I think they're the most beautiful animal, one of the most beautiful waterfowl species on Earth. The male has these bright colors, and they're just wonderful to watch. They use vernal pools because there's quite a bit for them to eat in a vernal pool. Now, we all know what mallards look like, otherwise known as greenheads. And the mallards are frequent visitors to the vernal pools because there's so much for them to eat in the vernal pool. That shallow water, they can reach the bottom and find all sorts of invertebrates and seeds to consume. Now, the vernal pools are going to contain an abundance of invertebrates, and that's why we see ducklings using vernal pools. If you're a duckling and you want to grow fast, visit a vernal pool, and there's going to be a lot for you to eat, and the parents will take the ducklings to the vernal pools so they can fill up on all the good food in the vernal pool. Now, white-tailed deer will use vernal pools. Now, of course, they're going to drink the water out of a vernal pool, but research shows that they gain a lot of sodium from eating the plants that are growing in the vernal pool. Aquatic plants can contain over 10,000 parts per million of sodium, and this is many, many more times than plants growing on dry land. So the female deer, they need the water when they're nursing, and all the other deer of all ages will benefit from the sodium and potassium that they gain from the aquatic plants. Now, this is a rusty colored blackbird, rusty blackbird, and they live and depend on vernal pools for their livelihood. And this is a blackbird we don't see too often. Their populations are declining across North America, mainly because we don't have that many vernal pool wetland areas. Now, bats will use vernal pools, and when you want to see bats using a vernal pool, you'll notice that they are swooping low, and they're actually drinking water on the fly. And when I used to trap bats, we would hang the nets, mist nets, over a vernal pool. And when we caught the bats, their chins would be wet because they would be drinking water out of the vernal pools. Now, everybody loves turtles. I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't like a turtle. Turtles, like this eastern box turtle, they will use vernal pools for food and water. And in the summer, when it's hot and they need to cool, they will burrow into the mud and they'll live in that vernal pool. And they can even overwinter in a vernal pool by digging into the mud so they can hibernate. Shorebirds, which we like to see along the ocean, This is the American avocet, and they make great use of vernal pools, and they use them for feeding during migration. These birds will be flying overhead almost a mile high, and they will see the mud surrounding a vernal pool that's going dry, and they're going to land and stop over and feed on all there is to eat in a vernal pool. Now, many different flowers will grow near vernal pools because of the moist soil. This is called rose mallow. Another name for it is hibiscus. It's a flowering plant that grows along the edge of the vernal pools. And the juices of this plant were used many years ago to make marshmallows. We gave the puff to the marshmallows. Now we use corn syrup. This is the cardinal flower. You'll see this growing around the edges of vernal pools that have partial shade. And this is so named because the bright colors reminded people of the beautiful robes worn by the cardinals in the Catholic Church. This plant is called bidens. A common name for it is beggar's tick because of the seeds that will stick to your clothing in the fall. And bidens is a plant that grows in vernal pools, and it needs sunlight. And bidens is very important to pollinators like bees and butterflies because it flowers a long time. It's just a critical plant to them. You're looking at the flower of a buttonbush that grows in vernal pools, and of course, a monarch butterfly. The buttonbush will flower quite a while, and the monarch butterfly will seek out the buttonbush and use this flower. And it's just an important species of plant to pollinators. You're looking at swamp milkweed and a monarch. The swamp milkweed will grow in the moist soil around a vernal pool, and it will flower again for quite a while. And we see that around vernal pools. We have many of these flowering plants that are growing because of the moist soil compared to drier ground. And we get quite a diversity of plants around a vernal pool. Now, maybe you've seen butterflies using the water in mud. Well, the monarch is using this mud and actually lapping up the water because it's high in minerals. And butterflies and moths will really use the water in the mud around a vernal pool because of their need for minerals. This is an endangered species, a rusty-patched bumblebee, and it will find a diversity of plants in which to gain, its pollen, its nectar. And these plants are growing around vernal pools, these shallow water wetlands that go dry in the fall. Vernal pools do not support fish because they go dry. Because they go dry each year, if there are fish in the vernal pool, the fish will be consumed by predators like great blue herons and bald eagles. And the lack of fish is what makes vernal pools such a unique ecosystem. Now, when you have fish in a wetland area, the fish have to eat, and they'll basically eat whatever they can get in their mouth. So fish will eat any animal they can find, explaining why we have low populations of frogs and toads and salamanders and invertebrates in a wetland that has fish. But if you have a wetland that goes dry, we're going to have a great diversity of animals because the fish are not eating them. Another bonus to living in a vernal pool is that you're not as likely to be eaten by a bullfrog. Now, the bullfrog lives in wetlands that contain water over two years in a row. They need perennial water because when they lay their eggs in a wetland, their larvae or tadpoles take 2 years to develop. So if the vernal pool dries each fall, then the bullfrog's not able to reproduce successfully, and we'll have lower numbers of bullfrogs, and that means we'll have greater diversity of other frogs and invertebrates. Now, maybe you've seen a fairy shrimp. Some people call these sea monkeys. The only place you're going to find fairy shrimp living and breeding is in a vernal pool. Fish in a vernal pool, they're going to eat all of the fairy shrimp. Now, these young men just found fairy shrimp in a vernal pool during the month of January in Kentucky. Now, this vernal pool wouldn't win any beauty contests. It's really quite unattractive, but it provides this critical habitat to crustaceans like the fairy shrimp. And the fairy shrimp is used by ducks for food. So if you have fairy shrimp, you have ducks that will find them and eat them. This is a clam shrimp. It's another crustacean, and it depends on vernal pools for its livelihood. The clam shrimp is a very important food item for waterfowl and also an important food item for salamanders. This is a dragonfly larva, and these live in vernal pools, and the dragonflies will lay their eggs in vernal pools, and the larval dragonflies are mosquito eaters. So if you have larval dragonfly in your wetland, more than likely you're not going to have any mosquitoes or mosquito larvae. You wonder why ducks are using this wetland. Well, because they're finding a lot to eat. We know that many ducks will tip up to eat, the puddle ducks, and if they're finding a lot to eat, they're going to stay in that wetland, and that's why they're using this vernal pool. Now, I was driving by this vernal pool, and I stopped to snap this photograph. Why? Because there were so many ducks on this vernal pool. I knew it was a vernal pool because there's a lot of ducks finding a lot to eat. It's teeming with invertebrates and seeds because there are no fish. Now, I like fish and I love to eat fish. I love to go fishing. But if you want to help waterfowl and if you want to help frogs, toads, and salamanders, give them a habitat without fish where they won't get eaten. Now, this is a natural vernal pool, meaning it's one humans did not build, and it's on the Danube National Forest in Kentucky. It supports quite a diversity of frogs, toads, and salamanders because it doesn't contain fish. This is a spring peeper that's using the vernal pool. You can tell the spring peeper because of the X on its back, and they successfully reproduce in vernal pools. Here's a chorus frog. You see the stripes on its back, and they successfully reproduce in vernal pools because there are no fish that eat them or their eggs. These are American toad larvae or tadpole, and these will use vernal pools, the shallow water that becomes quite warm in the spring, and the tadpoles are not eaten by fish because there are no fish in the vernal pool. Isn't that a beautiful salamander? This is a salamander, and it depends on vernal pools for laying its eggs. And the female will go into a dry vernal pool in the fall, and she will tunnel underneath a tree that's fallen into the vernal pool, and she'll lay her eggs, and the eggs will lay in the vernal pool beneath that tree until the winter when we start getting snow that's melting, and in the spring when we get all that rainfall. And the marbled salamander, its eggs are the first ones to hatch. And when you visit a vernal pool in the spring, the largest tadpoles you see are from the marbled salamander. This is a wood frog. It's a vernal pool species. It has a black mass. And the wood frog will reproduce in vernal pools because they do not contain fish or bullfrogs. Here are the eggs of the wood frog right here. And they look like you're holding on a clump of eyeballs. And you'll see these in February in a vernal pool when the ice is just melting on top of the water. And the wood frog is one of the few species that can freeze and come back to life. And they're in that vernal pool when that water is barely above freezing, laying their eggs. Now, vernal pools do not have to be attractive to have great value to wildlife. Now, this vernal pool is quite ugly to look at. It was actually made by elk in the state of New Mexico. It's an elk wallow. And they were wallowing in a place that had a high water table, and they made this vernal pool that was full of frogs and frog eggs. Even small vernal pools can have great value to animals. This vernal pool is about the size of a desk. It supports clam shrimp, marbled salamanders, and mountain chorus frogs. I know people who are building vernal pools this size in their backyard, and they're seeing frogs that are breeding in these vernal pools. Vernal pools can last a long time. Now, when I took ecology in college many years ago, they told us that wetlands were temporary features on the landscape. They were wrong. This is Cliff Palace Pond, a natural vernal pool wetland. It's in Jackson County, Kentucky. It's on the Danube National Forest. Cliff Palace Pond is surrounded by a mountain ridge. So it's way up on a mountain ridge, and it's surrounded by sandstone cliffs. The wetland is only 3 foot deep in the middle, and it will dry during a drought. The carbon-14 dating that we did shows that this wetland is 10,000 years old. That's pretty amazing. When you walk into Cliff Palace Pond, you'll find the bottom of it is quite firm. That indicates it dries every year, and it dries long enough for bacteria to decompose the leaves that have fallen into the water. So there's really no muck in the bottom of this vernal pool because the leaves decompose. There are no streams and no drainages that enter the wetland, and there is no dam that was constructed. No dam is present, but yet it's 10,000 years old. Now you are looking at a vernal pool wetland, and this was hand-built by humans over 2,000 years ago. It's on a ridge about the Little Miami River, and it's at Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve near Oregonia, Ohio. Now, many people think that you're going to find a lot of mosquitoes using vernal pools and wetlands, and this is why they don't want vernal pools in their community. Well, you are looking at mosquito larvae here. They're about 1/4 inches long, and they wiggle to the surface where they can breathe oxygen. And you'll find them in temporary wetlands, not vernal pools. Now, the red circles show you where mosquitoes may be breeding in your community. These small puddles of water, they don't last long enough for other aquatic organisms to live in them. So you may find mosquitoes breeding in a bird bath, maybe in an outdoor grill that doesn't drain, or a tire, or a swimming pool, or even a child's toy, or even a wastebasket that has a lid off of it. These are all excellent sites for mosquitoes to breed. This ditch here is not a high quality wetland. This ditch was dug to drain a wetland, and we find mosquitoes breeding in this ditch. This tire was discarded and never disposed of properly, and I found mosquitoes breeding in that puddle of water. That is not a healthy wetland. This 5-gallon bucket, it's an excellent mosquito breeder. We find mosquitoes laying their eggs and breeding in this wetland that is not healthy. This is a water trough on our farm. If I don't change the water every week, mosquitoes will breed in that water trough. And even this flower pot that has the hole plugged in the bottom, mosquitoes were breeding, and I found mosquito eggs and larvae in this flower pot. Now, when you have a healthy wetland, you'll have these larval dragonflies that are feeding on the larval mosquitoes. When you have a healthy wetland, you will have dragonflies flying around your wetland, feeding on the adult mosquitoes. When you have a healthy wetland, you'll have damselfly larvae feeding on the larvae of the mosquitoes. And you'll have adult damselflies that are feeding on the adult mosquitoes. And here are some of the mosquito predators that you will find in a vernal pool wetland. Everything from the predaceous diving beetle to salamander larvae. All these are mosquito eaters. And during the day around a healthy wetland, you'll find tree swallows feeding on the adult mosquitoes. So bats will feed on the mosquitoes at night around a wetland area. So what do we say about a healthy wetland? Mosquitoes may check in, but they won't check out. Vernal pools support a diversity of animals that eat mosquitoes. So these vernal pools will not cause problems in your community with mosquitoes. Vernal pools can be built, they can be restored. You are looking at a vernal pool wetland that we built in Kentucky by restoring a wetland in a farm field. Individuals are building vernal pools across North America to provide habitat for a wide diversity of plants and animals. We built this vernal pool in Kentucky in the Danube National Forest, and it's supplied primarily with groundwater. Here's a large field that used to be a wetland on the Muscatatuck National Wildlife Refuge in Indiana. And this field was made by filling and draining wetlands over 100 years ago. We decided to use heavy equipment to restore a vernal pool from this field to provide sandhill cranes with habitat while they're migrating. Looks like the project worked. Over 1,000 sandhill cranes are using this vernal pool that we built in Indiana. They found this while they were migrating. They came out of the sky and they spent days in and around this vernal pool. Now, this is called an eastern spadefoot. It's not a frog. It's not a toad. It's somewhere halfway in between. Now, their populations are declining in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island, and this species requires vernal pools for breeding. It has to lay its eggs in a vernal pool that doesn't have fish or bullfrogs. Now, here is a vernal pool that we built on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I've been working with Ian Ives with Mass Audubon over 10 years to build vernal pools to provide breeding habitat for the eastern spadefoot, quite a rare species. And here's one of the sites where we're planning to build a vernal pool wetland on Cape Cod. It's what we call a canopy gap in the forest. There's very few trees growing here. It has a slope less than 6%. It has a change in elevation less than 3 feet from upper to lower edge. Now, in order to build a vernal pool here, we need to use an aquatic safe liner because the sand, won't hold water and the groundwater is far below the surface. So I'll show you how we're going to do this. First of all, we brought in an excavator, and the excavator removed the topsoil and saved it in a pile for us to spread in depleted wetland. Then the excavator started digging a depression that was deepest in the middle, and we were out there taking all sorts of elevations using a laser and measuring this basin to make sure it would be the same size as the liner that we had ordered. Now here's the basin that's ready for an aquatic safe liner, and notice it looks like a giant satellite dish. It's deepest in the middle. And here volunteers are helping with this project. After they did a lot of hand raking, they spread this geotextile fabric in the basin, and now they're putting in an aquatic safe liner, like what's used in swimming pool. And this liner is aquatic safe. It's not treated with any chemicals. You can actually drink the water out of it. And we're putting in a sandwich, we're putting in a geotextile layer, we're putting in the liner, and on top of it, we put another layer of geotextile. Then we anchor the top edge using landscape spikes so it doesn't shift when we're covering it with soil. And here the excavator operator is placing that soil over the liner, a 6-inch layer. And this is important because plants can grow over the liner. And it's also important because animals like the turtles and the frogs can burrow into the soil to escape predators. So we use an aquatic safe liner, and I've developed a number of steps that are, help us build a wetland on sites with sandy soil or gravelly soil. And the way we're building these, I believe that these wetlands can last forever. The way we're building them, no dam, no water control structure, and they hold water seasonally. Okay, this is a finished wetland basin, and we've installed the aquatic safe liner, and we've covered it with the soil, and we are now spreading straw for mulch so we don't have erosion, and also we're planting native species. And we plant many native species of plants in and around these wetland areas, and this helps pollinators like the rusty-patched bumblebee. And also, we find that the eastern spadefoot it lays its eggs in these constructed vernal pools on Cape Cod. So this is an egg mass of the eastern spadefoot. It took over 8 years for them to start using these vernal pools, but now they're successfully using them. And this is really important because they're only found in one other vernal pool on Cape Cod. Now we have them using a number of these vernal pools that we've constructed. And here are the spadefoot eggs that have hatched, and they've developed into these little toadlets. And the eastern spadefoots that have developed from the larva, they're now returning to the vernal pools that we built, and they're laying their eggs and they're breeding. So we were successful in bringing back the eastern spadefoot to many parts of Cape Cod. Okay, maybe you've been to Kings Gap State Park in Pennsylvania. It's near the city of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And if you visit Kings Gap, you're going to see these signs telling you about the vernal pools, the Forest Pools Reserve at Kings Gap. This is one of the biggest attractions at Kings Gap is to visit the vernal pools. And this sign describes the importance of the vernal pools to breeding wood frogs, spotted salamanders, marble salamanders, and crustaceans. There are interpretive trails that lead you to the vernal pools at Kings Gap. But unfortunately, the vernal pools were not working the way they used to. Historically, the vernal pools would fill when the snow melted and hold water long enough for frogs and toads and salamanders to develop. But these vernal pools were going dry and dry too early and stranding all the larvae before they could develop. No one could determine why the vernal pools were going dry. We thought it was climate change. I came into the area and did quite a bit of testing with volunteers in the community. And what we determined is that the vernal pools historically were supplied with groundwater, but the elevation of the water table had dropped, primarily due to extraction of water in the valley, probably by many of the people that had built homes recently. And so it was really bad news for the frogs and turtles and the toads and the salamanders. So we had to figure out how to bring back the water in these vernal pools. Starting in 2010, we began restoring the vernal pools. And one of the first steps was to remove the leaves in the vernal pool basin and to save them to put back in the vernal pool. And then we removed the mosses before we restored the vernal pool. And we returned those to higher ground around the vernal pool after they were built. We brought in an excavator from the Upper Susquehanna Coalition in New York, and the restoration team worked with us to restore the vernal pools. And here we are removing the topsoil and saving it to respread in the vernal pool. And here's one of the vernal pools that we restored shortly after restoration. And we used the compacted clay liner technique because there was clay on the site. So we removed the clay, put it back in layers, formed a basin. Then also we used the aquatic safe liner technique in some of the vernal pools, and others we simply dug deeper to get at the groundwater. So here is one of the vernal pools we rebuilt by digging deeper to get into the groundwater, and it's just starting to fill with groundwater. Here's one of the vernal pools that we rebuilt using the aquatic safe liner because there was no clay and no groundwater. And we had a workshop here where people could come in and learn these techniques. And we have people coming in from the whole area to learn how to build vernal pools. And here's one of the vernal pools we built by using compacted clay liner technique. This is 1 year after construction. This vernal pool at Kings Gap, we restored this one by using the groundwater technique. And here's what it appears a few years later. And here's one we rebuilt using an aquatic safe liner. And this liner was protected by geotextile that was covered with soil. And what you'll notice is that these wetlands all look the same. They're all successful, whether you use clay, whether you use groundwater, or whether you use an aquatic safe liner that was buried in the ground. Now, I know folks who are now building vernal pools at their homes. And this is Tim Morton, and he built this vernal pool by hand. Isn't that amazing? And he found all these plants and planted them. And this is near Cincinnati, Ohio. I think that is just a beautiful feature. It sure looks natural, and the frogs and the toads and salamanders are really using it. Here's a vernal pool wetland that we built at an elementary school in Rowan County, Kentucky. And many, many students helped us build this vernal pool for environmental education because there's so much to learn near a vernal pool. And here's a vernal pool that cleans runoff from a site. And we built this near Moorhead, Kentucky. And here's one that we built at a school in an urban area, a small town called Prestonburg. And this wetland is used by a diversity of dragonflies and amphibians, even though it's in an urban area. And this vernal pool captures runoff from the roof at Rodward Elementary School in Moorhead, Kentucky. And it's full of dragonflies and frogs. And this vernal pool, we built this in a dry stormwater detention basin using an aquatic safe liner. Now, you know that if you get students out with them a net and you open up a world of wonder to them when they start catching all the animals that live in a vernal pool. And research shows that hands-on experiential education is something that students remember forever. And their mathematics scores and their science scores greatly improve when they have vernal pools to examine and to explore. I ask you to consider involving students in the design and construction and planting of small wetlands at schools. These students are learning about native plants and non-native plants. They're learning about vernal pools by planting around vernal pool they helped build at this elementary school near Louisville, Kentucky. Restoring a wetland can be a lot of fun. Returning those leaves to the wetland area to provide good habitat for invertebrates. Okay, so in May of this year, I worked with Dr. Moss and others, and we restored suitable locations for building vernal pond wetlands at the Robert C. Corby Arboretum Sanctuary in the village of Pittsford, New York. And we spent several days examining the area carefully, looking at the wetlands that were present, looking at the wetlands that were not available, like the vernal ponds. And we did a lot of this and wrote this report that's dated May 6th. And I'm sure that we'd be willing to share this with you so you would learn more about these wetlands that we designed.